This is the IDP After Show.
Hello and welcome to the Week 17 IDP Preview episode. I'm your host, Jase Abbey, and as always, we're going to be looking at the defensive players we think have some of the best and worst weekly matchups. As you prepare for what is, for most at least, the most important game of the fantasy season, the Fantasy Championship. Now, mindful of the importance of helping you guys and girls get your lineups right for this week of all weeks, we've brought back one of the finest minds in IDP, Mike Woellert, IDP analyst and ranker, and just all-round good guy. Mike, Merry Christmas to you, and thanks for sparing the time to come on. How are you?
Absolutely. Merry Christmas to you. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's about 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Christmas has fell in the middle of the week, and the NFL has decided to bestow 2 games on us on Christmas Eve, so we got to get this stuff out a little earlier than normal, and I don't think I'll be doing my rankings during Christmas Eve dinner because I think I would get the side eye and some evil eye from my family. So,
yeah, the NFL's not been kind to us with the schedule this year, has it? There's going to be a lot of unhappy families out there.
Yeah, NFL's trying to get into the NBA and trying to muster into the NBA's territory, but
yep. Yeah,
but look, I don't know if I have. I don't know. Hopefully, my in-laws have Netflix, so we'll have to see.
Well, I've got about 9 people coming tomorrow, so I'm gonna struggle to get away to do much. But my phone will be on hand, conveniently placed, so that I can catch as much as I can. But yeah, I can't wait to get into all of this with you tonight. So I asked Macri the same last week, but how have your fantasy teams done this year?
Little good, little bad. I got one going to a championship, and then last night I got lost in a semifinal. I basically lost by a tackle, essentially, at what it comes down to. So I will have. It's a championship rematch of last year, where I lost. So hopefully I will change the result of this. Hopefully it's a different result this year. So
there's nothing sweeter than getting revenge, is there, on the same person who ended your hopes last year.
Yeah. So we've been actually, I think we've been the 2 best teams in the league all year. So it makes sense. So, yeah.
It's also nice when it works out that way. I think I'm in. Is this the same league that you and I are in?
Oh yeah, shock and awe. Yeah. You just got into it. Yeah. That league's been around since 2007.
Nice. It feels like a really competitive one. I'm enjoying being part of it.
It's super. Yeah, it really is. It's like it's one of those leagues where it's like, if you think a guy's going to fall to you, it's not going to happen.
Those are both the best and the most infuriating leagues to be part of. But look, I can't wait to get into all of this with you tonight. In a minute, we're going to be offering up our nominations for Week 17. But before we do, we want to talk a little bit about injuries, don't we? Feels like it's been brutal on the defensive side, especially lately. And I think more than ever, those managers who have kind of stayed abreast of who to pivot to and who not to, maybe at times, they've enjoyed the success. That's been the difference between success and failure. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's knowing kind of who, I guess, the backup's going to be, and getting in on that right backup. Now, I know I've always not been right on some of the backups, but this week especially, you've got quite a few injury situations to keep tabs on. And I know the Titans linebacker situation is going to be very messy leading into this week. I know it looks as if though Carolina's linebacker situation is kind of, showed itself, with Trevin Wallace and Clyde and Chairless on IR. So I think we have a clear idea kind of who the 2 linebackers in Carolina are with Jewel and Jacoby Windman. And then, the Giants decided to wait to put Okereke on IR, so we have that. But McFadden suffered an injury, so I think this week is more than normal. Keeping an eye on those injuries, and again, like you said, who to pivot to. Then we've had, someone with some role changes. So like last week, I think you've seen kind of the decline in, someone like Isaiah McDuffie and kind of the rise in Edrin Cooper. And it kind of played itself last night where Cooper saw 70% of the snaps and McDuffie, I think only ended up with like 30. So just, there hasn't been many of those this year, especially with the rookie linebackers, but just kind of keeping an eye on any of those injuries, what's going to happen. And, we try to, Sunday was a mad dash to hit refresh to find it, to get some information. And sometimes you just don't get it and it happens.
Yeah. And it's backups of backups in some cases as well. Like these are guys, a lot of these guys that we're seeing becoming, coming into relevance this time of year. These are guys that weren't on the radar at all before the season started.
Yep. And you could be starting them in your championship. If you were starting Bobby Okereke and Kenneth Murray and a couple of, your starting lineup could be like Micah McFadden or Darius Muasau or Jacoby Whitman or any of those Tennessee linebackers. So it's your roster is definitely could be looking a little bit different this week. Yeah,
that's it, right? So mindful of that, look, let's try and help some of these people out with some of our choices this week. And we probably got to touch on a few of these guys who, again, weren't on the radar coming into this season. So, look, we're going to alternate back and forth, as we always do, starting with your choice, Mike. And we've got a couple of guys who we want to nominate as our primary nominations this week, mindful, again, of the fact that there are fantasy managers out there who are desperate for as much information as they can get. So, Mike, let's kick things off with linebacker. It's a position for which you are famed as the OG Green Dot King. Tell me who you think can help IDP managers bring home that fantasy championship this week.
Well, one of the games kicks off on Wednesday. We have, Kansas City, Baltimore, we have Kansas City, Pittsburgh. I'm still thinking he's on Baltimore, and that's not the case anymore. But we have Kansas City, Pittsburgh kicking off 1:00 on Christmas. A guy who's kind of picked up his production, Patrick Queen. He's got 8+ tackles in 4 of his last 5 and 5 of the last 6, including 3 games of 10 or more tackles. Over the last 6 games, he's got a 14% tackle rate and is producing 0.27 fantasy points per snap, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that actually is a pretty good snap. That actually is a good points per snap rate. No one really is a threat to the tackle share on the Steelers. I don't know if Deshaun Elliott is going to be playing. He was really the only other guy that really was getting tackles in the secondary. Elandon Roberts saw more usage last week just against Baltimore's defense, but it only turned out he only had 2 tackles. Peyton Wilson, again, he gets a handful of tackles. Both of those guys are usually only playing about 30 to 40% of the snaps anyway. So I think Patrick Queen, for the most part, at that second level, has the tackle share for the most part all to himself. And it's actually a pretty good matchup for him. The Chiefs are a top 10 team in tackles allowed to the linebacker position. So it's a good matchup. They have allowed around 18 tackles a game. They allowed 19 tackles to the Texans linebackers last week with Henry Tutos and Christian Harris. So the last 3 weeks, they've allowed about 17 total tackles. And again, Patrick Queen is kind of the tackle share hog. So I think he's in a good spot to produce 8 or more, getting into that 9 to 10 range against the Chiefs, because he'll either be helping and stop the run. He'll probably be, maybe keying in on either Noah Gray or Travis Kelce, kind of covering in that middle of the field. So I think Patrick Queen is in a good spot to help your team this week.
Yeah, it's a good shout. I like Queen. I was moaning the other week about how, those big plays haven't been there in the way in which we saw during his time in Baltimore, right? But like you say, that tackle production has picked up recently. So for that, we're grateful. Great matchup. No complaints here. You've got another guy for us as well, right?
Yep, and a guy who kind of started in a 3-man rotation, but really since probably I'd say almost week 4 or 5, really finally solidified himself as a 3-down guy. calling the plays. And that's Daiyan Henley. I think you can start him, no problem at all. Again, love the matchup for him this week. He's been a consistent tackler all season. The Chargers are mostly in a zone defense for about 80% of the time, and that has proved to be productive for linebackers. Talking about tackle share, he is the lone 3-down guy. Guys like Denzel Perriman and Junior Colson aren't seeing the majority of the snaps. The Chargers are mostly in kind of this big dime single linebacker. So, Perriman I think last week Perriman only saw 11 snaps. I think Junior Colson he's playing about 25-30% of the snaps. So again, tackle share really all to himself within the linebacker position. Obviously 3-down role. He's got 10 plus tackles in 8 of his last 9 games. He's producing an elite 15.5% tackle rate. And again, the Patriots, you wouldn't think of it, but they are one of those top five team in tackles allowed to the linebacker position. They're allowing almost 18 tackles a game. They've allowed almost 23 tackles a game over the last 3 weeks to the linebacker position. So again, Daiyan Henley, I'll probably have in my rankings within the top 5, definitely top 6 or 7 linebacker this week. So again, fire him up, and I think you can start him with full confidence.
Yeah, it's a good shout. I'm a big Henley fan, a Chargers fan, and I was. What frustrated me perhaps was this theory, this preconception that Denzel Perriman as the bigger guy back there was kind of like the run stuffer, the more solid tackler perhaps, and that's just not who he has been this year. I complained about him earlier in the year. He's had one super productive season in his career, and that was probably I think it was the only season he played more than 600 snaps, and it's not, as I said at the time, not just because he's injury prone. He's just not that guy. So I'm really happy to see Henley emerge. He did so, because of injuries, perhaps a little earlier than he might have done otherwise. But from that midpoint on, for the rest of the season, he's been great. He's been by far the best Chargers linebacker in coverage, and at times the only Chargers linebacker.
The only Charger in coverage. And I mean, when you look at his defensive grades, I mean, when you look at him they're okay. He's gotten, I think, an overall 70 grade, which is above average, but his coverage grade has been a 73.7, which that's how as a linebacker, that's kind of how you stay on the field, is if you're solid in coverage. His missed tackles, he had 4 in week 15, but still his missed tackle rate is 11.7, which isn't horrible. I mean, as a linebacker, you're going to miss tackles. Everyone, you're prone to miss tackles, but yeah, he's been solid, a run defender and a solid tackler and just an overall defender.
Yeah. And I know this is a weekly show we're talking about here. We're talking about the weekly outlook, but for dynasty purposes, just briefly, you need to remember this was a guy that didn't have a lot of history playing linebacker, or as relative to other linebackers that were in that draft as well. And people looked at Colson, that familiarity with Harbaugh and Minter and everything, but they kind of forget that Henley was also a 3rd-round pick. It was viewed as more of a project maybe, but it's really nice to see him come into his own this year. So yeah, I'm all for this pick, Mike. I like it. So I've gone with 2 guys as well, Robert Spillane and Christian Rozeboom here. And talk about Spillane first. The tackle numbers, they have been there most of the year. The ratio of, the ratio of solos to assists hasn't been quite where we want it to be in those recent games. It's been quite frustrating, but we know that it can ebb and flow, right? It's not like he's one of those guys who really struggles in that sense. So 14% tackle efficiency this year. That's really healthy. 32nd out of 120 linebackers with a minimum of 100 snaps. And I like his chances of producing big in this matchup. The Saints top 3 in terms of tackles allowed to opposition linebackers. And that trend, it's encouraging to see, has persisted regardless of who the Saints have at quarterback in recent games. We saw Edgerrin Cooper and Eric Wilson, 16, 17 tackles between them last week. And that was despite, as you know, Mike, more than most, Cooper played something, it was south of 70% of the snap share. So I think when we're looking at Spillane as a full-time guy, as the leading tackler on that Raiders team, he's in line for a big week. I like what he's got to offer. Where do you say?
Yep, I think Spillane, though, he's definitely had a knack or a knock of not being as productive, but he's been more, I guess you could say more consistent. It's that slow and steady wins the race. And I think since the bye, he's been pretty solid. Double-digit fantasy points in what looks like 5 of the last 6, 8 or more tackles in what looks like 5 of the 4 of those last 6. 134 tackles on the season. 8 tackles for loss. He's been pretty solid. So, decent matchup against the Saints. So, Spillane, I think, is at this point of the season, if you've got healthy linebackers and if they've got a pulse and they're not on the injury report, I think you just start at this point. It's like I create this flow chart. It's like week 17. Is your linebacker healthy? Yes. Is he on an injury report? No. Start him.
Start. I like it. I was struggling to find some guys at one of the other positions we'll talk about in a bit, but similar process as well. Is his matchup not horrible? Is he healthy? Yes. Yeah. Right. Let's talk about him. So my second guy is Christian Rozeboom, and he's been on. We talked about Spillane maybe tailing off a little bit after a really strong start, but Rozeboom's kind of the opposite. He really came into his own in those recent games. I feel like he's been on a bit of a tear. No fewer than 7 tackles in the last 6 games. The knock on him at times, I think, Mike, and the reason he hasn't probably been mentioned more on the show, I think he's featured once as a linebacker is that we've been slightly put off by that snap share. It hasn't been horrible, but it hasn't been quite to the level where his efficiency is fantastic. I'll talk about it in a second. Kind of makes up for the slight disparity between his snap share and that of those every down guys. So it has been as little as 75% over that sort of 6-game span, which is concerning. But as I say, his tackle efficiency has been incredible. I don't have the numbers here, but I know he's sort of top 3, top 4, top 5, might even be higher than that. What makes me want to mention him this week, though, is a combination of that efficiency as well as the fact that his snap share has suddenly increased to levels which make me really, really comfortable inserting him into my lineups. 98%, I think it was last year, something like that. Last week, missed maybe like 2-3 defensive snaps in total. And assuming that carries over to this week, and I've got no reason to think it won't, I think he's in a really good spot to produce big again, especially when he's got, again, a matchup like this one. The Cardinals, they've allowed top 3 tackle numbers to opposition linebackers.
Yeah, Rozeboom's tackle rate, right around, it's an elite rate, 16.8%. So, that's elite. Since week 12, he's had 80% or more of the snaps in those 4 games. Like I said, I think he was on the field for all but 3 snaps last week. So, they've been doing fewer zero. Rams have been doing fewer zero linebacker packages, and I think they kind of trust Rozeboom to be the guy kind of at the line to man the linebacker spot. So haven't really heard anything on Troy Reeder coming back. So I'm not anticipating him. He's just been on IR. I haven't seen any news on him being activated or anything. Omar Speights has been getting some consistent snaps, but still only been in that 50 to 60% snap range. So again, not a guy you can really trust, but yeah, an efficient tackler. He's had a few games where he's had fewer than 70% of the snaps, but has gotten double-digit tackles, like week 4, played 37 snaps, 11 tackles. That's almost what is that? Almost a 30% tackle rate. So that is absolutely insane. It's an unsustainable rate because, the previous week or the next week, he played 51% of the snaps, had 6 tackles. So another week he played 33 snaps, which was 62%, only had 3 tackles. So, but now that his usage has kind of, I know there's a fancy term for it. I don't know what it is. It's kind of settled. 60, he's producing double-digit tackles. And like I said, he's had 90%, 87% or more of the snaps in 3 of his last 4. So the usage is there. He's in a full-time role, and he's definitely making the most of his snaps and has definitely been productive. And again, kind of that LB2, LB3 almost this week.
Yeah, that guy that's kind of just emerged from relative obscurity. We kind of expected him to have a role this year, right? And he did out of the gate. But then obviously the injury to Reeder Rozeboom stepped up. They kind of flirted for one or two games with playing Spates ahead of Rozeboom. I don't remember if Rozeboom suffered an injury there, but like you say, the snap share has been where we want it to be. We know the tackle efficiency might not be sustainable going forward. It's pretty much not going to be. But for this week, full-time guy, high tackle efficiency, really good matchup. Plug him in, profit.
Yep.
So let's talk about some of the other top linebacker matchups. We wanted to touch very briefly on some of the other teams and some of the guys on those teams who the IDP managers out there might want to look at in week 17. What we got here?
Yeah. So I mean, if you're looking at from a points allowed standpoint, the Browns have actually allowed the most points to the linebacker position. So you've got like guys like Jordan Brooks and Anthony Walker. Washington second in points allowed. So you're looking at you're looking at Caden Ellis, who is pretty much a must start anyway. He's been on fire. The Eagles are third in points allowed. So whoever the linebackers are in Dallas, another injury situation, Maris Liufau and Nick Vigil were the guys last week, but we'll have to keep an eye on Eric Kendricks. The Minnesota Vikings are actually allowing the fourth most points allowed to linebackers. So whoever, you've got Quay Walker, Edrin Cooper, and Eric Wilson as the potential three. And then you've got the Tennessee Titans, who are fifth in points allowed to the position. So you've got Foyesade Luakun and Devin Lloyd in good spots. And then as far as tackles allowed, as of right now, it looks like the Steelers are first in tackles allowed. So do we trust Nick Bolton in a good matchup? I mean, that's kind of a tall task. He's been kind of rough, but you mentioned Arizona, you mentioned Christian Rozeboom already. The Lions are actually third in tackles allowed to the linebacker position. So Fred Warner is in a good spot. And again, you got Miami, Dallas, New England, Philadelphia, all kind of in that allowing around the same amount of tackles. So, so you got someone like Jordan Hicks, who's in a good spot. We've already mentioned Daiyan Henley versus the Patriots. And then you have the Eagles. So you got, your Dallas linebackers. So I think those are kind of the top matchups that are in place this week for the linebacker position.
Yeah. And we think we could probably even extend that to some of the less stellar names on some of those teams as well, like the Drew Tranquil. I've kind of, if you're in a four linebacker league, Drew Tranquil, you're a Browns fan. How about Diabate? His snap share isn't where you want it to be, where he'd be like a linebacker, even like a linebacker 2, but as a low end 3 or 4,
I would trust Drew Tranquil over Muhammad Diabate. The production just hasn't been there, so he's tough to trust. But no, that's a good shout out with Drew Tranquil. He's definitely making the most of his snaps. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk linebacker fades. Who do you have for us here?
The Seattle linebackers are in a tough spot. Ernest Jones is going to be tough to sit. On any week, but this is a tough matchup. The Bears aren't a great matchup for linebackers. Over the last 3 weeks, they've allowed 12. They're allowing almost 12 total tackles to the position. They're allowing right around 15 tackles a game to the linebacker position. Ernest Jones had kind of Seattle had a rougher matchup last week. Minnesota, again, was a tougher matchup for the linebacker position, and he only had 5 tackles. So, another unfavorable matchup. I don't think Tyrice Knight is a must start. So if you're looking at someone who has a similar usage, or if you're looking at someone like if you have someone like Christian Rozeboom on your roster, Tyrice Knight, I am starting Rozeboom ahead of Tyrice Knight. So Tyrice Knight is more of that lineup or that matchup play linebacker where, he's not a must start. So I think, you can play the matchups with him. So Jones obviously has the upside to produce double digits at any point, but I mean, it could be one of those weeks where he could be looking at maybe LB2 or LB3 type numbers. So he may not crack my top 10 rankings. So I'm kind of tempering my expectations with Ernest Jones, just knowing, but he's tough to sit in really any given week. So if it's coming down to someone like a Fasade, a Lukun, or Ernest Jones, I'd probably play Foy over Ernest Jones, something like that. So so that's I think the Seattle linebackers are kind of in a tough spot this week.
They are, and you've covered it well there in the sense that, you know, if you've got Jones, unless you're absolutely stacked at that linebacker spot, you're probably not going to be sitting him. But there might be, you know, there's people listen to this show who have got all sorts of sort of different starting requirements, roster limitations, etc. If you've got some of these other guys, have a look at Mike's linebacker rankings. That's the answer here, right? So have a look at those linebacker rankings. If you're stacked at the position and you've got 2, 3, whatever your starting requirements are, better linebackers or higher ranked linebackers than Jones, then you can sit him. But for the most part, he's too good. No linebackers matchup proof. But yeah, have a look at those rankings is the takeaway here. But for in all your other points, or on all your other points, and in fact on that one as well, totally agree. So my fades here, I've gone with 2 teams. So Bears and Giants linebackers. You know, and in a similar way to Jones, most linebackers, or most IDP managers out there would have a hard time sitting TJ Edwards. Right, he's had another productive year, relatively efficient as a tackler, but again, you know, this matchup with the Seahawks, this is on the other side of that one that you talked about. Mike is just not good. They've allowed fewer than 13 combined tackles to opposition linebackers on average per game this year, which ranks right near the bottom. And I wouldn't sit Edwards unless you're loaded at the position, but I would sit someone like a Tremaine Edmunds, who ranks 105th out of all linebackers with a 9.7% tackle efficiency. He's someone I think you can avoid if you've got any other full-time linebackers available. Thoughts there, Mike?
No, Tremaine Edmunds has been very inconsistent since leaving Buffalo. And even when he was in Buffalo, it just, his tackle rate for a full-time linebacker is, you know, not great. So no, Edwards is a tough sit. But yeah, Edmunds is a matchup play, and I've got no problem benching him this week.
Yeah, he had that one sort of really big year, didn't he? In terms of, like, was it?
I think it was his rookie year, and then it's just been, and then that's really been it for Edmunds. Yeah, he had 121 tackles in his rookie year, and got close to 120 in 2020, but has just kind of hovered around that 100 mark over the last several years.
That's it. So the other team I'd look to avoid this year is this week is the Giants. They've also got a terrible matchup against the Colts, who I think, along with the Seahawks, are the only other team, or one of few of the teams to allow fewer than 13 total tackles on average to opposition linebackers per game. And you mentioned McFadden's neck injury. Doesn't appear to be serious. I'm still waiting for more news on that. But even if he's healthy, I'm slightly concerned that they may split time to some extent in what's, let's face it, it's a meaningless game for them, right? So that concerns me a little bit as well. But more than anything, it's that matchup again, Mike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see. Next can be tough, but Darius Muasau was playing had more of a full-time role regardless. So, the Giants, the Colts have not been. You would think with like Jonathan Taylor, they'd be a good, but no, they really haven't. They haven't really been a good matchup for linebackers. You've had those exploded, those ceiling weeks, but overall, it hasn't been a great matchup for linebackers against the Colts.
Nope. So other worse matchups. I've got a few to mention here. You can add to this as well, Mike. But I've mentioned the Bengals. This is in terms of tackle production. So the Bengals versus Broncos. So Jermaine Pratt and I guess ADG now all of a sudden. The Commanders versus the Falcons, so Wagner and Luvu, and the Bucks versus the Panthers, so Levante David and presumably JJ Russell as well, although with Russell as well is the snap share as well to be a little bit concerned with. Do you have any others for us there?
Yeah, the The Jets have been kind of a tougher matchup. The Jets are, over the last 3 weeks, 12 total tackles per game. So tough to sit Terrell Bernard, but I don't know if I'd sweat over starting an LB2 from Buffalo, whether it's going to be Dorian Williams or Balin Spector. I know both of those are suffering from some injuries. I know Spector left with an injury, and they even said Dorian was playing with some injuries. So I don't think you can worry. I don't think you need to worry about starting a linebacker 2 against the Jets. But yeah, the Falcons have been a tougher matchup for linebacker. So like you mentioned, Wagner and Luvu. And the Broncos, you did mention the Broncos. I think you mentioned the Broncos, and I think Houston has been a tougher matchup for opposing linebackers. So I'm not going to say you can't sit Roquan Smith, but there's definitely not an LB2 that is a must start in that defense.
All right, so look, let's switch focus to the defensive line. Which D lineman do you like in Week 17?
So I like. I know he's kind of been up and down, but Josh Allen has a pretty good matchup with Tennessee's offensive line. They've got a couple of turnstiles at the left and right tackle spot. Josh Allen had a 91.4 pass rush grade in their first go around against Tennessee. He had a 12.5% pressure rate, which resulted in 1 sack and 2 hurries. On the season, he's got a 13.6% pressure rate with a 0.85 second pass rush get off, which means it's taking him just under 1 second to get off the snap. And he's got a 20% pass rush win rate. So, and on top of that, 4.7% big play rate, which is tackles for loss, defended passes, sacks, tackles for loss, QB hits, and your forced fumbles and fumble recovery. So has a pretty decent upside for some big plays. Allen should line up on J.C. Latham's side of the field. Latham's been better as of late, but still a below average pass blocker. He's allowed 6 sacks and 10 quarterback hits. The Titans have a team pressure rate allowed of 40.1%, which is the second worst in the league. So I know Will Levis isn't playing, but yeah, and plus the quarterbacks have been responsible for a lot of their own sacks along with the tackles. So I think this is a good spot for Josh Allen. I think he can, get another sack, maybe even multiple sacks against this horrible offensive line in Tennessee. I mean, that's the only way I can put it.
Yeah. It's one we've mentioned them a few times on this show this year. It's one of those teams that we have kind of picked on a little bit, but with good reason, right? And whether Levis has been back there or someone else, it has been a real struggle for them. And I was looking at the amount of pressures allowed by Rudolph, or by Rudolph's offensive line rather, and 64% of the pressures that he faced, I think last week were allowed or surrendered by his offensive tackles. So yeah, I think this is a really good shout. And they were allowed by the right tackle more than most, which doesn't really favor Allen, but it's not like he can't come up big in this game. I think I like this shout. Who else do you have here and why?
I think this is a good game for Khalil Mack. His sack rate hasn't been great, but he's still been an elite edge rusher, pass rusher. He's generated a 14.4% pressure rate, 20% win rate. He has multiple pressures in 4 of his last 5, and he's got a 6% big play rate. So he's still getting those tackles for loss, getting those QB hits, getting those forced fumbles and recoveries and defended passes. I mentioned the Tennessee Titans being second in team pressure. The Patriots have the highest team pressure allowed at 41.1%. So he should line up over Vidarian Lowe for most of his snaps, but he has seen plenty of snaps on the right side. On the left side. So he also should see some DeMontre Jacobs, who's been just as bad. Vidarian Lowe, a 55.9 average pass block grade over the last 6 games. He's been responsible for sacks in 3 of the last 6. And like I said, if they do move him around, he could see Demontre Jacobs. Jacobs has been responsible for 8 sacks and 7 QB hits. Drake May has also been responsible for 8 of his own sacks, and he's had an average time to throw of nearly 3 seconds, which 3 seconds, if you're holding the ball for more than 2.5 seconds in the NFL, you're screwed and you're getting pressured. So I think Khalil Mack has a definite sack upside in this game to kind of break out some of the funk that he's been, because I know he's only got 5 sacks on the season. So I think this is a good spot for him to kind of break out of the funk and, maybe get that 6th or 7th sack this year.
I like it. And it seems a good way to pivot into my nomination. So I've gone with a Chargers edge rusher, but I've gone with Bosa here. And this one is going to surprise people. I know that. It's not going to appeal to IDP managers for the most part, because he's been hampered by injury yet again. It's been another injury plagued year for him. So it has slowed his production. None of his underlying metrics look too rosy at this point, but there's a few things working in his favor of late. He had 2 sacks in his last 3 games. Last week played a season high 78% snap share. He's not listed on the injury report, but the main reason I'm suggesting him, Mike, is one of the points that you touched upon. He's going up against arguably the worst starting tackle in the NFL this week, Demontre Jacobs, because Bosa does spend more time on that side of the line. Jacobs has allowed more pressures and the 4th most sacks, despite playing only or less than 500 pass blocking snaps. And, as I say, with Bosa lining up on that left edge opposite Jacobs, I think he can have a good game here and surprise some. That said, we do have to look at his poor production over the body of the season, with perhaps the injury in mind. But yeah, I would start him if I was scrabbling around trying to find some help on the defensive line this week, especially now he's healthy. He is a very good player. He's just been, like I say, almost to this point, career hampered by injury, not just this season, right? So, so there's him. Van Noy is another one. It's been a really nice year for him. 12.8% pressure rate, ranks 32nd out of 149 edge rushers. His 19.5% win rate, ranks 24th, and he's already got a career best 11 sacks this year. But I think he's got a good chance, Mike, to improve on those numbers this week against a Texans team who have really struggled to protect CJ Stroud. They've got a good pair of offensive tackles, right? Titus Howard, Laramie Tunsil. It's kind of surprising in some ways, but we know that sacks are not just the fault of offensive lines. Sometimes the quarterback is at fault here. Stroud he's faced more pressure than any other quarterback except Geno Smith, taken more sacks this season than anyone other than Caleb Williams. And again, 21% of that pressure rate, or 21% of his pressures in total, have been allowed by that right tackle spot. I think that could get better for the opposition team this year, or this week, in fact, because Howard has just moved inside to guard over the last few games following the injury to Juice Scruggs, who has a fantastic name, I will mention. And I think Howard's replacement at right tackle, Blake Fisher, may struggle against an in-form Van Noy. So I haven't really mentioned him this year very much, but I think on the Fantasy Championship week, Van Noy is someone who I'd be inclined to trust. What say you?
Yeah, Blake Fisher does play tackle. He played 43 snaps, it looked like, at right tackle last week. Mm-hmm. He had a 50.1 pass block grade, allowed 2 quarterback hits, so not entirely great. So he's definitely been in the red overall as a pass blocker than in the green or even the yellow or orange. I think he's got an overall pass block grade of 41.1, which, again, not great.
Yeah, and I think when you consider that in the context of the fact that Titus Howard was definitely in the green in terms of his pass blocks, right? And, they were still struggling. What's it going to look like with someone else over there? I don't think it's going to look great. So other top defensive line matchups. I'll let you lead on this one. What are you thinking?
Yep. So in terms of points allowed at the defensive end position, the Cleveland Browns have allowed the most points to defensive ends. So I love Chop Robinson this week. He's been on fire in terms of pressures and his win rate. So Chop Robinson is in a really good spot. The Giants second in points allowed to defensive ends. So Kwity Paye in a good spot. We've already mentioned the 2 edge rushers and defensive ends for the Chargers. Titans are third in points allowed. Bears are fourth in points allowed to the defensive end. I don't know if there's anybody really on the Seahawks that I would really trust this week. I mean, if you're streaming, maybe a Derek Hall. But I think on the interior, I think Leonard Williams is probably in a good spot to get a sack or 2 with the way Caleb Williams holds on to the ball. The Eagles then are fifth in points allowed to opposing defensive ends. So Micah Parsons is in a good spot. I know the tackles are really good, but Jalen Hurts, again, is one of those guys that just can kind of hold on to the ball. And Micah Parsons had 2 sacks in their first go around with the Eagles. So I'm not saying a multi-sack game, but, if Parsons is able to, generate any type of pressure. I know Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson, good tackles, but again, sacks and pressures can sometimes be a quarterback stat. So Jalen Hurts is holding the ball too long, not getting that ball out. He's definitely susceptible to pressure.
Yep. I love the chop shout, and I was slightly disappointed to realize that Jermaine Ifedi plays on the other side of the line to that which Chop usually lines up on. But it's still a really good matchup for all the points you mentioned. I think you mentioned the Steelers versus KC as well. Watt and Highsmith. Highsmith looked good. As far as the Seahawks edge rushers, you mentioned Hall, maybe Marte. Hasn't quite had the season we hoped. The snap share is not quite there. Therefore, the snap pass rush numbers, they're not quite there either. But he had a sack last week. Maybe he can use that as a jump off point, a catapult to launch him into a better week this week. But we'll have to wait and see, I guess. But yeah, I like those mentions.
Chop does have a little over 200 snaps on the right side, so he could get some of those left tackle matchups.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong. Again, you're the Browns fan, right? Ifedi is the weak spot there right now, isn't he? By far
definitely the weak link of that defensive line or that offensive line for sure.
Right. Let's hope that people listen to this have Chop on their rosters, because if they have, the way he's been playing over the course of the second half of the season, he'd definitely be one that who'd already be in lineups. But
and DTR is a rookie, and he's holding the ball a little too long as well. He's not going, he's taking a little too long going through his reads and progressions. So I think he's also holding the ball. He was holding the ball for what appeared to be 3-4 seconds going through his reads, and that's kind of what caused some of the pressure for him to be, having to get out of the pocket.
Yeah. And isn't he a little banged up as well? Did I see that? Or am I thinking of someone else?
Yeah. No, he is banged up. He could start, but I mean, you could see Bailey Zappy. So
same
not,
sort of
not great. Yeah.
Same advice applies in terms of Chop,
right.
So DL dislikes. Who do you want to talk about first, Mike?
Andrew Van Ginkel. I mean, it's hard to dislike one of the top sack leaders, but as a whole, the Packers have a team pressure rate allowed of 30.5, which is one of the better pressure rates allowed. The Packers have a really good offensive line. They have two really good tackles. Jordan Love gets the ball up relatively quick. Van Ginkel should line up over Zach Tom. Tom has an 81.6 pass block grade on the season. I haven't seen the numbers from last night, but I don't think I know they did not allow a sack. I know Jordan Love did not get sacked. Tom has allowed 2 sacks and 2 quarterback hits allowed on the season. He's gone 7 straight games without a sack allowed, and he's been responsible for just 1 sack in the last 9 to 10 games. Van Ginkel is not somebody who generates a lot of pressure. He's a high motor guy, so he's a guy that doesn't quit till the whistle ends. I give him that. He's just one of those nasty guys that just won't. He was not going to stop till the whistle goes. But yeah, it's just a really tough offensive line matchup for him, and I'm probably going to have him ranked outside of the top 15 if he gets some tackles. But I don't think I'm expecting a sack from him this week.
Yeah, I think I don't want to speak for you, but we hate to do this at this point in the season with guys like Van Ginkel who've been so good, right? But we have to go with what we've seen on the other side of the ball as well. These guys that are going to be stopping the likes of Van Ginkel from producing as he has. And, like we've been talking about the Packers offensive line for a little while now. They're very close to allowing the least amount of sacks in the NFL, if not the least. Like you say, Tom and Rashid Walker have been
Walker's
supreme this year. And Love, like you mentioned, when pressure does come his way, the ball's either out there already or he's evading it in some other way. So last night 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 pressures in total they allowed. Tom allowed none. Walker allowed 2 and 0 sacks. So just more of the same from the Packers last night, and that kind of is a reason to fade Van Ginkel a little bit. Again, though, if you're starting 3 defensive linemen, maybe 4, then he should absolutely be in your lineup still. I think you'd agree on that one, Mike. But this might not be the week for him. At least temper expectations is the advice, I think.
Yep.
And that's kind of like the same approach for my guy as well, to be honest with you, Leonard Floyd. Gone against the grain a little here. He's had a good year. Every year he seems to have a good year. I kind of undervalue him coming into every season. And the last time I talked him down on this show, Mike, he went out and erupted. It was the first week that Bosa was going to be out. So I've got egg on my face a little bit there. And he's got the chance to do so again, but it's not a very good chance, I don't think. His snap share, I noticed, diminished with the rise of Gross Matos and the return of Bosa. 45% last week was his lowest of the year. Kind of hard to be productive when your role is diminishing in that way. Takes only one play, but the likelihood reduces at that point. I also hate the matchup. The Lions have allowed the second fewest sacks in 2024. Only 9 in their last 7. A large part of that is the play of their offensive tackles, much like the Packers. So Sewell, Taylor Decker, they're right up there. Floyd will face, probably both of them as he does move around in terms of from one side of the line to the other. Don't dislike Floyd as such. I just like him less than usual.
Subject says it all.
There it is. All right. Other worst defensive line matchups. I've gone with a couple of guys who have been kind of hot names. One of which certainly Will McDonald. So the Jets versus Buffalo. Again, Buffalo don't allow many sacks, and Allen is he's right up there with, I guess, like Lamar Jackson, Jordan Love at avoiding pressure even when it does come his way. So I'm fading a little bit or dropping in my rankings if I did DR rankings this year. Will McDonald, Quinlan Williams as well, and then the Bengals versus Denver as well. Bo Nix has been surprisingly good in terms of his pocket presence. For a rookie. So as much as I wouldn't want to not start Trey Hendrickson, given how good he's been yet again, if I had others, and again, if I was stacked at the position, I would consider others. And I guess, we've got to talk about Asai in that case as well. I was going to mention Hubbard, but no one should have Hubbard in their starting lineups.
Isn't he up for the season anyway?
Is he?
I thought he was up for the season
yes,
anyway.
You're right. Yeah. They definitely shouldn't have him in the start.
Yeah, you definitely should not be starting Sam Hubbard.
Yeah. I got too caught up in criticizing Hubbard for his lack of pressure and sacks when he's not even on the field. So we can forgive him for that. Any other terrible DL matchups to talk about, Mike?
No, I think you got him covered. I think the Chargers also have a pretty good offensive line, but I don't know if there's really anybody on the Patriots I could recommend. I mean, Keon White has just suffered a massive downfall. I don't think he's had a sack since he's only had 1 sack since the start. Like, he started the season, I think he had 4 sacks in the first 2 games, and I think he's only had 1 sack since. So I have a hard time playing Keon White this week against Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt. Really tough offensive line there. The Cardinals are also not allowing very many points to the defensive end position. So I know with Arizona, you've got Jared Verse, you've got Byron Young. So, maybe temper expectations there. And then I think the Saints, another team not allowing very many fantasy points. So the Raiders don't have very many, options outside of K'Lavon Chaisson, which is a name I never thought I would probably hear myself recommending. I know he's got a good O-line matchup, but he was one of the most inefficient edge rushers when he was with Jacksonville. Is actually playing pretty well, but does have a good O-line matchup. So he's probably the only one I could probably recommend if you need a DL streamer. But yeah, those are probably some of the worst DL matchups, defensive end matchups this week.
Yeah, and this is despite Trevor Penning. We were talking about the Saints there. Penning's been pretty terrible most of the season and especially of late. But who do you recommend? Because as well as Chason's played at times, or as productive as he's been, certainly recently, would you want to trust him going into the fantasy championship game?
Oh no, of course not. But there's a lot of people that kind of stream the position. They that's kind of what they're looking at. So if you need a streamer as like a DL3, hopefully not your DL1, that's those are if you're starting 2, 3, 4 defensive linemen depending on the league that you're in. So no, you're not going to sit I'm not recommending you sit Jared Verse for Caleb on Chison or like those types of names. But like I said, if you drafted one elite guy and maybe a solid DL2, but you're streaming that third position, that third DL, he can be in late. But it's other than that, the Saints have been pretty good. Have been relatively good up front.
Yeah,
Spencer Rattler hasn't, but
yeah, yeah, that could help. DBs, Mike, it's time for those DBs. Who do you want to talk up in week 17? Who do you like at the DB spot?
Jessie Bates has kind of picked up his play over the last couple of weeks. Over the last couple of weeks, he's overall he has a 2.2% big play rate, which doesn't sound like a lot, but dude's played over almost 950 snaps. So that big play rate, including again TFL, sacks, interceptions, passes defended. He had a pick 6 last week. He has a 9% tackle rate, which is actually a pretty solid tackle rate for a defensive back in the safety position. Washington is 9th in tackles allowed to the safety position, and they've allowed nearly 18 tackles a game to that safety position over the last 3 weeks. Jaden Daniels has also thrown an interception to a safety in 2 of his last 3 games, and Jessie Bates is a pretty savvy veteran. So again, I think he's one of those guys. I think he's can kind of lure maybe Jaden Daniels into that false sense of security and maybe get a pick. But I think he could be in line for tackles at the rate which Washington allows tackles to that safety position.
Yeah, and we don't like to rely on that big play production from DBs. But if we were to do it for any defensive back, Jessie Bates would be, certainly safety anyway, Jessie Bates would be the guy we'd do it for, right? Because he's been so consistent in that regard for so long now. And despite, his production has picked up recently, and that's not because of his tackle production. That's because of his big plays. But this week, he's got an opportunity to record a big play, as he so often does, as well as put up solid tackle production. And for that reason, I like this call.
Yep.
My shout is Grant Delpit. I like what he's got to offer this week. We know, again, big plays. Talk about big plays with Jessie Bates. Grant Delpit's like almost the exact opposite. Big plays haven't been there for him this year, but he's been a reliable, efficient tackler at the position. Ranks 27th out of 114 safeties with a 10.8% tackle efficiency, which is really nice for that position. And in fact, that efficiency means that despite playing far fewer snaps than he did in 2022 when he finished with a career high of 102 combined tackles, he should beat that this year and put up another career year, or a new career year in that sense, despite playing far fewer snaps. So, but it's kind of like more about anything than just efficiency, right, Mike? The Dolphins are a really tasty matchup this week. They're allowing top 5 tackle production to opposition safeties, and as the only full-time safety on the Browns, I like his opportunity here. What do you think?
Yeah, I've always liked Grant Delpit. He's always been one of those guys. He's got always seems to have his nose in the ball, nose around the traffic, so not afraid to lay in a hit. So no, I have no problem with Delpit. I think I did actually write in somebody else real quick. I'm not sure if you saw, but if you're looking for a DB streamer, Damani Richardson, Jordan Fuller was actually a healthy scratch last week, and he got in and played a full-time role. He's played mostly the deep safety, 36% of his snaps near the line of scrimmage, but 13% tackle rate in games where he plays 100% of the snaps. Tampa Bay first in points allowed to the safety position, 8th in tackles allowed to the safety position, and they've also allowed almost 17 tackles per game to safeties over the last 3 weeks. So if you're looking for a DB streamer, Damani Richardson.
Yeah, that's a good shout. I like that one. I'll check his availability in my leagues because he's not been on my radar, Mike. So good shout. Other top DB matchups, Mike. I've got just 2 here. So the Commanders versus the Falcons. Again, this is tackle production. So Jeremy Chin, not so much Quan Martin. Haven't been looking at Quan Martin all year. And then the Lions versus the 49ers. And these are 2 guys who should have been in your lineups pretty much all year. So Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch. Loved what they've both done this year, and I think they can help you into week 17. Any others to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I think the Texans, pretty good matchup for Kyle Hamilton. It might be tough to recommend Cameron Curl, but Quentin Lake is actually in a pretty good spot for tackles against the Cardinals. I will say, as kind of devil's advocate for the 49ers, I'm not suggesting you bench Brian Branch, but 49ers have been pretty stingy over the last couple of weeks, so just keep that in mind. They've allowed 10 tackles a game to safeties over the last 3 weeks, so a little bit stingier on that side of the ball, but I would have a very hard time benching Brian Branch, though, overall. I mean, I think he's definitely been one of those guys where, he's one of those few safeties I put within the category of a Derwin James, a Budda Baker, maybe even a Kyle Hamilton, where you just put him in your lineup and you forget about it until the bye week.
Yeah, probably add Nick Ross to that list as well, I guess, based on what he's done this year.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the DBs we're fading. Mike, who's your top guy here?
This kind of pains me because I love Kyle Duggar. I love the way he plays, but I think he's in a tougher spot here. He took over the green dot last week. He had a pretty solid game, but I think with him maybe communicating to others and putting others in the position, getting those signals, getting people in the right position, he may not be in a position to make tackles. Plus the Chargers are a tough matchup for opposing safeties. Regardless, overall, they are the second worst for the safeties. They're allowing right around 11 total tackles to safeties per game. The last 3 weeks, they've been allowing just under 10 tackles at about 9.7 tackles per game to the safety position. It's been about 6 assists or 6 solos and about 3.5 assists per game over those last 3 weeks. So, Duggar, it pains me to say, but he's definitely more of a matchup play. And if you have better options, I think you might want to consider those options this week.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough with Duggar because he's got that kind of usage that we like. And, certainly his production over the last 4 games, minimum of 7 tackles in each of his last 4 is really nice to see, especially for a DB, right? But yeah, this matchup is not one that whets my appetite for the reason you mentioned. The Chargers have been one of the worst. So, DBs aren't that hard to come across. They're pretty plentiful. You can always get an every down guy. Have a look at what else is out there, I guess, is the takeaway here, right, Mike? And if there's better, then obviously lean in that direction.
And if I can anticipate probably a question that I probably would receive, would you start Damani Richardson over Kyle Duggar? Yeah, probably. I think I probably would in this case, with just based on the matchup. I wouldn't feel great about it, but I probably would do it.
Yeah. So I've gone with another Patriots safety, and mine's probably an easier call than yours. You've been a lot braver than me. You've been ballsier than I have, Matt. And I wouldn't have even mentioned this guy if he didn't have a productive week last week, a forced fumble, interception, a pass breakup. Some people out there might be tempted to start him. I'd like to think this isn't the week that would happen. Most of the managers that have made it to this point in the fantasy season probably a little bit more shrewd than most, and will look at things like. And my biggest criticism of Mapu, I guess, is 73% snap share. So, he only produced 3 combined tackles. Talked earlier about not chasing that big play production. I don't like his chances this week. I'd be more inclined to go with every down guys over someone like a Mapu. Again, the usage is kind of nice. Played plenty of snaps in the box, but yeah, 73% snap share isn't where I want it to be for any DBs. I could get away with that for a linebacker as an LB3, LB4 if I was struggling, but for DBs, I'm a bit more picky. What are you thinking?
Yep. No, you said it.
Yep. Other terrible DB matchups. Well, not necessarily just terrible ones, but bad DB matchups. What have you got listed here?
The Titans are allowing the second least points to the safety position, so I don't really think there's anybody on Jacksonville you're eagerly starting. But the Eagles also pretty stingy to opposing safeties. I think one of the interesting ones, though, could be Minnesota. Minnesota's allowing the 4th least points to the safety position. So that leaves you that puts you in a bind if you're a Xavier McKinney owner. So tough matchup for McKinney this week. And then you've got the Saints are a relatively tougher matchup for the opposing safeties. So, Trevin Moehrig, I'm not gonna, you got Paulo Mau. So that's kind of a tougher matchup. And then in terms of tackles allowed, the Jets are really a tough matchup for tackles to the safety position. So guys like Damar Hamlin are in a tough spot. Taylor Rapp in a tough spot. And the Browns don't allow much to the opposing safety. So Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer are in a tough spot. And the Carolina Panthers are also a tough matchup for opposing safeties. So guys like Kevon Merriweather, who are fringe guys, may look to other players, other guys at that position.
Yeah, and that's a real shame for when you mentioned the Buffalo safeties there for Cole Bishop. Saw him, get some significant action this past week, and there's only one of a couple of times this year where he can really say that's been the case. We were all kind of high on him coming into the league as that box safety. We saw him get plenty of box snaps last week. Was really productive with it as well, 8 tackles. So yeah, just not the greatest of matchups. So yeah, he's like a trendy player. People might be tempted to start him on that basis, but again, keep those expectations in check, I guess, is the takeaway. So there we have it. That is, Mike, a wrap for the show. It's been another bumper edition, intentionally so, because as I say, we get a lot of questions each week based on the guys we haven't mentioned. Should I include this guy? Should I not? So we've tried to include Mike's suggestion. By the way, I want to give him the credit for that. Let's talk about some of the best and worst matchups in addition to the guys that we've nominated. So thanks for that, Mike. Look, this has been the Week 17 Fantasy Championship edition of the IDP Preview episode, so we take it seriously, and we hope that this advice and the talk that we've had today has in some way helped some of you guys over the line, or will do in the week coming. Mike, you've always been awesome whenever you've come on here. Today's been no different. And I have to say, I knew you were good prior to working alongside you. We did a little, a couple of weeks alongside each other at 4 for 4 when I kind of ghosted in there for a little bit. But yeah, being able to talk IDP with you each week, as we do over here at the IDP show, has really kind of given me an insight into how hard you work, how dedicated you are to this, and just how good you are. So, but look, that's enough of me giving you a big head.
Yeah, dude, seriously, I'm not, I'm glad I'm able to make it look so easy. But
yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on this week of all weeks. Absolutely. As well. It's difficult. This is the week when people need the most help. Having the likes of Macri and then you coming on back-to-back weeks has been huge. We appreciate it. But
absolutely,
before I let you go and spend some time with your family over Christmas, or not, given what we said earlier on about that NFL schedule over the next few days, yeah. Please tell us more about what content you've been up to this year and what you've got planned for the off-season as well. That's kind of what people want to hear about at this point, I guess.
So yeah, the Green Dot article is updated now through all the games from Week 16. rankings should be up as normal. Remember, week 17 begins tomorrow, so you've got 2 games tomorrow. So make sure if you got those key players on your team, make sure you get them in your lineups for tomorrow's game. And then as far as off season, I'll take some time and just kind of recharge, and then it's watching some of the college players, and kind of next thing you know, but you blink of an eye, the draft will be here. So the draft will be here. So kind of getting things ready for 2025. Take some time off, recharge, reset, then get ready for the draft, free agency and the draft.
Absolutely. So there you have it. To our audience, thanks for dropping by. We appreciate your support all season. We hope, as I said, perhaps more this week than any other week of the year that you get the W this week. But this is not the last IDP preview episode of the season. We know there are some brave souls out there who don't play their championship until week 18. So for you guys, we'll be back again next week. But until then, we hope you enjoy the festive period, get that win, as we said, and bye for now.
This was the IDP After Show.